Whether it's the free dogs in the house, or the constant consumption of rice, and the family pressure of being enrolled in this. She a child, look how stressed he looked. Or just being too dang successful academically. There's definitely some amount of shared experience we all have as Asian Americans in America. What exactly does it mean to be Asian American or a Pacific Islander? Well, you are born in this landmass. Done. Obviously more than that. A lot more, right? I just learned what AAPI meant like a year ago. My parents still don't know what that means. The video that really sparked this debate was because of this funny bit by Ronnie talking about Rishi Sunak being prime minister. In the bit, he kept talking about how Indians aren't Asian. You can't have it both ways.
But let's be clear, Indians are not Asian, okay?
In turn, Asian Boss also made a video asking Indian people in India about what they thought about this. It seemed like many Indian people seemed to agree that they would prefer to be identified more as Indian than Asian.
I would normally prefer to say that India is separate, like a separate continent in itself.
I think I see myself as an Indian.
I'll get more into these videos in a bit, but that kind of reminded me of my own experience and background. Growing up in Nepal till about the age 9, I don't think I cared at all about being Asian. It made almost zero difference in my life. I only really cared about being Nepali. For us, Nepali was either this, or some mix of those very drastically different looks. But either way, nationalism mattered way more. Not looks or geography as much. For a small country located in between two giant superpowers, China and India, this makes sense. In fact, I think it's pretty common. I distinctly remember all of us jokingly slandering India and China as kids. There were some serious political tension. The adults would probably take way too far at times. For us, it was mostly in a joking manner. So I guess there's some beef there, but what country in Asia doesn't have a beef with any other country in Asia? Ask an older Korean person how they feel about Japan. Ask a Pakistani immigrant how they feel about India.
When I will grow up, I will be army and save Pakistan and destroy India.
Those are always very fun dinner topics, I guarantee you that. The historical drama of colonialism and shared arbitrary borders consistently perpetuated animosity that comes out whenever it's politically convenient. Despite the looks or the culture being somewhat similar in these cases, it does not overcome the barrier of national identity. Asian landmass just isn't a strong enough identity to unite those countries. This is true at least in the native country. In America, I think it's a different story. Then I moved to Queens, New York. I suddenly was inserted into a completely different system altogether. A community that was filled with many different nationalities and ethnic groups from everywhere. Mexican, Chinese, Bengali, Nepali. There were different holidays for every day of the month, different foods, different festivals, different languages. I could literally hear Spanish music blasting like 5 minutes ago. In my head, I never imagined America to be like this. I thought America was just mostly tall, blonde, beautiful people with really good lawns and barbecue every Sunday. It was definitely a culture shock. In fact, I'd almost say I was dizzy with freedom. But despite all that, I think I adapted extremely well to America, and I was always baffled by why. New York just happens to have a very unique set of circumstances that are not really present in any part of the world, other than maybe LA or Bayside. Middle school and high school, I went to a pretty selective IB program. Naturally, as the statistics and the stereotype go, the school was mostly Asian. There were many other groups there as well. I think what tends to happen in many other places is that the similar looking people do congregate in the same quads and cliques. Like the brown kids will hang out with the brown kids, Latino kids will hang out with the Latino kids. This was still a bit of a thing in our school, but I think it was noticeably a lot less compared to any other places. Most of my friends were either East or Southeast Asian. I didn't really get cliquey. At the time, I didn't really pay much attention to that because even in New York, the largest group of people that are Nepali tend to be Sherpas. So for me, like I really didn't focus on that difference as much. I think it was just natural for me to hang out with whoever I hang out with. I think it is also true that generally like more East Asian cultures have larger foothold in American culture just because they've been here for a longer time. Growing up, for example, like a lot of the media that I consumed was from YouTube. People like Ryan Higa, Kep Jumba, Wong Fu. Man, I miss the old YouTube. They were all Asian, yeah, but East Asian. But I just found so much relatability to them that in my head, I never really noticed them as being different. Obviously, there's some differences there. In that sense, I really felt like I had a connection with almost every group. I didn't really notice my Asian-ness, and I especially didn't notice my South Asian-ness. I do remember feeling some amount of pride over being Nepali. It's probably a very uniquely New York experience. In hindsight, I'm very thankful for that. I think this shift changed a lot more when I went to college. This is when the idea of being Asian seemed to matter, but I think it had to do with these conditions. One, in college, there was a lot more white people compared to NYC school, though my school still had a very large Asian population. But outside of school though, upstate New York was very noticeably conservative, and I was not necessarily used to that at all. And two, The ASU organizations in campus were extremely influential. They held concerts, hosted festivals, religious ceremonies, dance ceremonies, invited famous people, and you just wanted to be a part of it. Who wouldn't? The orgs were often split into countries. There were Indian student organizations, Korean student organizations, Filipino organizations. So there was a lot of authenticity that was provided by that. Nothing got broad stroked by the term Asian. For example, there were Holi events, Barrio events, Lunar New Year. I think it made for an awesome experience that everyone wanted to take part of. White people, black people, Latino people. Number 3, I think the Asian movement as a whole took a sharp rise in 2017 to 2021 era. Movies like Crazy Rich Asians, shows like Never Have I Ever were being produced. Mostly because Hollywood figured out that good stories with representation actually makes a lot more money. But even more so than that, the fantastical rise of K-pop and anime being mainstream created a rapidly needed representation increase for East Asia. Jimin, you're my bias, bro. This was huge. It really started to feel like it had become a mainstream look, mainstream feel, mainstream culture. Of course, there was a dark side to all this as well, but I think overall, it was a positive thing. In college, I feel like something about being Asian started to feel like it was more of a clique. I think that feeling was completely novel to me. That being said though, every light side probably has some dark to it. No identity could ever encapsulate an individual. So how can it ever classify a group of people? Can it? Asia is a big place, man. It's a really, really big place. But Asian American and Pacific Islanders are a very small percentage of USA. I think a mixture of those two things play a strong role in the tension in our community. This kind of brings me back to the Ronnie Cheng in the Asian Boss video. So are Indians Asian? Geographically, yeah. On the other hand though, having that broad stroke of Asian runs the risk of just broad stroking like 1.5 billion people. The biggest criticism I started hearing that East Asian culture often overshadows Southeast and South Asian representation, and it takes away from the other groups. This is also partly why in the Asian Boss video, a lot of Indian people wanted to be referred to as being Indian first. I really don't agree with the idea that we are all that different. But however, I could completely understand where this tension is coming from. This is what makes it such a great discussion. In fact, it reminds me of this quote by philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre: "Existence precedes essence." In his book Being and Nothingness, he wrote about how human beings are almost too radically free. So we often rely on our context and our environment to shape who we are, forging our identity and sense of self. Basically, there's no essence to who we actually are. Not really. We just first exist. And everything in our environment forces us and shapes us into an identity. And this identity is meant to protect us from our dizzying amount of freedom. I don't think it's a very radical idea for most people in our generation, but for people of my parents' generation, it's almost unthinkable. Your blood, your family, your culture, your genes, your country are essential to who you are, they would argue. But Sartre would say these things are just designed for us to cope with our inherently meaningless existence. And in the end, I think that's really where this discussion will go off into. The discussion of how our identity, desire to fight against oppression, and our need for connection forges our sense of how we identify and how we use it. The essence of what Asian-ness means is completely contextual, and maybe that's kind of scary, but I think there could be a lot of beauty in this. John also had a lot to say about consumerism and capitalism. I feel like those things are not necessarily what I need to talk about to make my point for this video, but I think it's worth noting. I never really had the hope of being truly represented in the same way that the Chinese student organizations or the Indian student organizations had. Like I said, in college, a lot of the orgs were nationality based. Even the frats were either East Asian or Latino or brown frats. It definitely felt like there was a certain conformity you had to accept, and that's the dark side that I was talking about earlier. For this reason, I really did look at almost every group as a function for my connection. My friends were still largely a mixture of East and Southeast Asian Americans because I had uniquely stayed close with all my high school friends. My college group of friends were mixed, but they're also predominantly Asian. However, I stay in touch with all the orgs, the Desi org, Japanese Student Union, the Korean Student Union. Eventually though, I landed and I stuck with Filipino Student Union because I loved their hip-hop dance teams. They had members from all the other orgs in that. They were just really good, and I just wanted to be a part of that. I specifically bonded with the e-board and the group of people they had. They just had a really good vibe. More importantly though, I felt like that organization always had groups from every other ethnicity. At this point, I really wanted there to be some kind of unity. It was just really fun for me to hang out and get to know everyone. I performed a lot of cool events that I never even heard of before. I really made the most amazing lasting memories through this group. I would have never expected it. I think this is what makes the shared identity so useful and special. If I hadn't considered myself an Asian, or only called myself a South Asian, or only ever looked for a Nepali friend, I may have never looked to join the Filipino org. And as a result, I would have missed out on some of the best connections I've ever had in my life. So why don't we do with identity what it's actually designed to do, especially collective identity? Use them accordingly, right? Because once again, existence precedes essence. In some ways, what I'm saying is be a person first. I feel happy when I see movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once succeed because it's a phenomenal movie. I feel happy when I see movies like Natu Natu win because it was an awesome movie. Are either of those things Nepali? No. But both of those things have had a positive influence in my life and in the lives of thousands of other Asians, and I'm sure non-Asians as well. Sure, we could keep dividing the Asian identities into different subcategories, whether it be South, Central, Southeast, Himalayan, Desi, Islander, whatever it might be, when that's useful for representation. But that doesn't mean we can't come together when it's needed. Like, use the word Asian when it comes to movements like Stop Asian Hate. The attacks at that time definitely affected East Asian passing people more. And I wasn't personally subjected to the attack, but I have uncles and families and friends, and they also likely have gone through that. So of course we should fight for each other. Similarly, when attacks against brown people happened following 9/11, a lot of the other Asian communities and Black communities and Latino communities also equally advocated for South Asian rights and Middle Eastern rights. So for a community that makes up less than 7.2% of the population in the US, only dividing us into different subgroups makes less sense. Kind of defeats the point. At least I think it does. So are Indians Asians? Yeah, of course, if they want to identify as that. We can have both representation and unity at the same time if we learn to balance between those things and see identity as a tool. Ultimately, it is an illusion. A lot of things are just that form of story. Nationalism is a story. Shared collective identity is a story. Even where we choose to call things family is a story. So we get to pick the story that's useful for us. Thank you so much for watching. This really was a strange topic to make. I feel like it was a very much departure from the other videos that I've made in the past. 2-3 years ago, I feel like this discussion wasn't even being had. Hopefully it helps bring understanding and bridges gap between people that think they're different, but really are not that different at all. Thanks. I make a lot of different types of videos. Sometimes it's science, sometimes it's politics, oftentimes it's just philosophy. Like, comment, subscribe.